G'day guys and welcome. My name is Michael and I am the Deadaussiegamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Today we're back with another player archetype talking about the Sim. Now the Sim goes by various other names such as the physics professor or the pulley system player, but whatever you happen to call it, I call them one specific thing: the simulator. Someone who is trying to apply real-world physics to a fantasy or narrative setting. Now, there's a lot of negative stigma that goes through this particular player archetype, but today I want to remind you that we are focusing on how to draw the best out of each and every player archetype that we are going to be discussing in this video series. So, without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about playing a sim. So, first and foremost, the one thing that we notice in regards to simulator-based characters is that they aren't all the same. They all share some common grounds. They all like problem solving, and for the most part, they have a good grasp of how the world interacts within the narrative. Whether that's by applying real-world physics to the, sort of fantasy world, or whether it's just being able to interpret the rules of the fantasy world and how the physics works there. They use these bits of information and they use these physics in order to better become problem solvers, meaning that, well, for the most part, they are fantastic for thinking outside of the box and, getting through traps and obstacles and challenges, but can also cause a little bit of turmoil when people's views of physics don't really match up. I think that there are three particular type of sim characters, and I kind of view it in almost like geological standards. The first layer, or the first type of sim player, is what I like to call the loose stone sim. Now, these guys are very adaptable. They are the best kind of problem solvers because they interpret whatever information they get as just food and fuel to be able to help their problem solving. If you tell a sort of a top layer sim that fire, for example, actually forces heat downwards in your world, they accept this as truth and use it to adjust their understanding of the world around them. As we kind of move away from the top layer, we get into the sedimentary layer, where anything you make as a rule becomes hard fact. These guys are a little bit more rigid in terms of how they play. For example, gravity works like gravity does unless there is an external influence. Heat and kinetic energy and, all that sort of stuff tends to work in a way that they understand and can relate to. These guys are fantastic because for the most part you will find very complex solutions to puzzles and challenges will come from this layer of sim character. The last layer is the bedrock layer. And I know that sounds really terrible, and that's because, well, it is. For the most part, it's very hard to play with bedrock players because quite literally they're the ones who absolutely and utterly refute any kind of fantasy physics. It's all real world or it's completely unbelievable. They can get into long-winded arguments about different types of physics and so on, which makes them potentially very difficult to deal with. But this being said, it does not mean that there is no place for them. As always, there are places for any kind of gamer at the table, and we are going to be exploring today how those three types of sims can fit into our basic game, our basic table. All right. So, now that we've talked about the player traits, let's talk about character design. What type of characters do we expect to see from sim-based players? Now, a sim-based player is someone who enjoys the challenge of problem solving. While you have people who do like building and stuff like that, and sim can definitely share a lot of traits with builders, the sims are more about not worrying about, I suppose, the mundane of your game. What do I mean by that? What I mean is like, let's say you're playing a pirate campaign. It is not surprising if the sim player decides to play an aquatic race. While that's a very logical choice, it means that that is one less problem that your sim needs to worry about, and it is an extra tool that they can use to get a leg up on any problems they may face. For example, if there is a hole at the bottom of your pirate vessel, then the sim player, having already played an aquatic race, will be able to deal with that challenge. If you are playing in a game filled with the undead, they might play a paladin or a cleric, and in that similar vein go, well, we're surrounded by hordes of the undead. Do not worry, I have channel energy and I can destroy all these undead. So their designs are usually steeped with understanding what type of game they're going to be in, and then trying to solve that first puzzle of what would be the most appropriate thing or what would be the best fit for this world I'm about to embark on. When that happens, I highly recommend you embrace their, I suppose, I don't want to say predictability, embrace what they're trying to do. Don't say, well, look, you're not going to have fun if you play a cleric in my undead game because nothing's going to be a challenge. Rise to that challenge. View it as okay, I'm going to give this sim player a few easy challenges. There are definitely going to be scenarios where they're going to take the advantage, but I am not going to let that get me down because I, as a great GM, am going to find ways to bring out the most in that player by putting them in tight positions where their abilities may or may not work. Now, this being said, that's how I would try to get the most out of the character design element, is to allow them to really explore what they want to do and then come up with some strategies to help challenge them. You know what? And the other side of this as well is often you can work with a sim player on their character design and they'll actually help you come up with challenges for their own characters. And if you do that, more often than not, they'll then entertain themselves trying to figure out how to thwart themselves. And at that point, they're just kind of, pitting their own wits and intelligence against themselves, which is fantastic. It means you don't have to do anything. All right. Next up, we're going to be talking teamwork. Now, there are many different ways of teamwork. Obviously, there's if you are the sim player or if you are playing with a sim player. Here's a couple of things. Number one, I am a very big advocate of team building. I'm a very big advocate of players working together in order to overcome obstacles. This being said, however, the exception to the rule is the sim. In many cases, sims have the ability to function independently with little or no worry. You'll often find that there will be scenarios where there is no choice and the party has to split up. The sim acts in a great way because they can adapt to the situations that they are facing quickly and be able to problem solve with not only just the mechanics on their sheets, but their innovative ideas as well. So having a sim in a position of leadership on a team or even as a second in command is a fantastic way to best utilize them in your group. If you happen to be a sim player, one thing I've got to urge more than anything else is try to leave the physics arguments to the end of the game. Try and take it from the perspective of your players. If everyone's getting into the discussion and everyone's kind of really invested in this plan that's coming up, then sure, discuss it, talk away, because it engages everyone. If, however, you look around and no one's paying attention or no one's engaged, then don't sweat it. It doesn't mean your plan is bad. You've probably got a great plan. What it means is that they might be chasing something simpler, something more direct, something that will have a risk. Because at the end of the day, risk is not a dangerous thing for a game. Yes it is, but it's not the be-all end-all. You can take risks, because sometimes that's where the fun lies. The last thing I want to say here in terms of the teamwork stuff is if you do find the opportunity arises, remember that when your GM presents you with something at a game table, even if they contradict themselves, even if they, follow some sort of physics or belief that you don't really match with when in your game, it is more important in that moment to be able to go, this is the new information. Take it and work with it. Than it is to put up a barricade and say, actually, wait a minute. I need to explain to you, GM, how this should work. Don't worry about that. If it's essential for your particular plan and you need to explain where you're coming from, sure, explain why the catapult and its arc should take you over the ballast if you, at a certain point in the arc, decide to jettison some extra weight. Sure, absolutely. Explain that a little bit, but don't go too far, That's the biggest, I suppose, sin for the sim, is going too far. All right. Next up is, of course, playing with them. When you are a GM, what do you do when you deal with a sim? Now, if you want to get the most out of your sim, puzzles are the best way to do it. They feel a great sense of accomplishment, a great sense of achievement, and always remember that sometimes even if your player solves the puzzle super quick, don't be afraid to congratulate them on it. Don't be afraid to make them feel that sense of accomplishment, because if you make things more and more challenging for them because they're succeeding so well, you'll find that joy in problem solving becomes spite very quickly, and your sim player will start to spite you as a GM. So do try and avoid that. The other thing I would highly recommend is that don't get comfortable with the idea of what I like to call wall obstacles. Now, wall obstacles are obstacles which are there to prevent players or groups from going in a particular direction. Let's say, for example, we are exploring a dungeon, and it is like a world-famous dungeon that is like 100 levels deep. You have walled off a section of the tunnel and collapsed it with stone and said, this is the way you need to go. And for some reason, this player will turn around and say, well, actually, if the rubbles are there, I'm sure I can lift these 3 rocks and we can clear that and we can explore what's beyond there. Does anyone want to do that? Oh, we all want to do that? Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to break this apart. Okay, cool. As you open it up, there's a force wall behind it. Force wall. Jerry, did you bring that rod of cancellation? Fantastic. We still have that rod of cancellation from, like way back when. Remember when we were picking those strawberries and it was like lodged into the bush? Yeah, we've still got that. Let's use that. We'll dispel the force barrier. That's the nature of Sims. Is they're problem solvers, and they will see any challenge, any obstacle as something to overcome. They will eventually, sort of back off from it. They will eventually retreat because they're very smart. They will read the writing on the wall. But don't get attached to the idea of stopping them from going through stuff, because, oh my God, like, I know this is the thing that I have in common with sim players. I tend to look at a scenario and I didn't even see challenges as insurmountable. I don't look at a wall and I go, I can't get through. I go, okay, do I dig? Do I climb? Or do I burrow? Like, what do I do here? And then I try and solve it. And that frustrates my GMs quite a lot. So just bear that in mind. All right, last but certainly not least, the weaknesses. What is the weakness of the sim? Now, I mentioned it before, and especially around the talk about the bedrock player. But the weakness for me of a sim player, is the idea that they need to solve their problems on their own. The weakest sim player in my mind is a person who tries to act almost entirely independently. If you're a sim player, remember, your tool chest is not limited by your character sheet. You have a whole team of people there to help you out, and every single piece of your puzzle is like a Swiss Army knife to them. If you might not have the right tools for that scenario, but that doesn't mean you check out. It means you look at your toolbox, you see what everyone can do, and you can even look at from a bigger perspective at how those different powers and abilities interact with each other and affect the world. Once you start thinking like that, you've got yourself an A-grade sim. An A-grade sim is what I meant to say, but there you go. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do like the player archetype videos, do let me know in the chat below, and I will see to making a few more. Of course, we will be doing a few more spotlight videos and all that next week. And of course, we have our GM advice video coming out on Sunday as well, so be sure to tune in for that. If you want to go check out all of our other stuff, we're on Twitch. We are on Discord, links will be in the description below, and if you want to support the Deadaussiegamer, then literally as little as $2 a month can make it go a long way. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Until next time, remember, game hard or die trying. See yas!